The gospel story is told from the Gospel of St. John, the 11th chapter. In a certain village, there was a man in a certain village named Bethany. There was a certain man that was ill. His name was Lazarus. Now this was the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who had anointed Jesus' body with perfume and then wiped his feet with her hair. When the sisters found out that Lazarus was ill, they sent word to Jesus and said, "Lord, the one whom you love is ill." Now when Jesus heard this, he said, this illness will not lead to death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God might be revealed through it. Now Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in that place. And then he said to his disciples, he said, "Let us go now to Judea." And the disciples said to him, "Lord, they were just now trying to stone you, and you're going to go back?" Jesus said, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? Whoever walks in the day does not stumble, because the light of Christ is in them. It's whoever walks in the darkness that stumbles, because the light of the world is not in them. Our brother Lazarus has fallen asleep." And the disciples said, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he's going to be okay." Now Jesus had meant that he had died, but the disciples thought merely sleeping. So Jesus told them clearly, "Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sake that I was not there, so that you might believe. But let us go to him now." Thomas, one of the 12, who was called the twin, said to the other disciples, "Let us go with him, that we might die with him." Now when Jesus came to Bethany, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles, and many of the Jews had come out to comfort Mary and Martha concerning the death of their brother Lazarus. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him while Mary stayed at the house. And when Martha saw Jesus, she said, "Lord, if you had been here, our brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask God, God will give you." And Jesus said to her, "Martha, your brother will live again." I know that he'll live in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" And Martha said, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the one coming in to our world." After Martha had said this, she went back to call Mary. And she said to Mary, "Mary, the teacher is calling for you and wants you to come." Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the same place that Martha was. So when Mary heard this, she got up and she went out to him. Now those who were comforting Mary, when they saw her get up and go out quickly, they followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep. When Mary came to Jesus, she knelt down and she cried, "Lord, if you had been here, our brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews that were with her also weeping, he said to them, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, Come and see." Then Jesus also began to weep. When they came, so that some of those people that were with him said, See how he loved Lazarus? But others said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind, could he not also heal this man?" Now when Jesus came to the tomb, he was again deeply grieved. And he said to them, "Remove the stone, because the tomb was a cave with a stone in front of it. And Martha, the brother of Lazarus, said, "Lord, there's already a stench. It's been 4 days since he died." And Jesus said to Martha, "Did I not say that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. And then Jesus looked up and he said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but I thank you for hearing me now that the people might believe." And then he said with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus came out. His hands and his feet were bound, and there was a cloth over his head. And then Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the gospel of the Lord. Would you join me in prayer? Holy God, as you called Lazarus to life, so you call us from death to life. We come today, some with burdens, some with worries, some with concerns, but we come to hear your word of peace. Called by your Spirit, we pray that you would open our hearts and our minds to receive the gift of your word, the gift of your love, as your word is proclaimed, as songs are sung and prayers are lifted up in your name. Amen. We've been reading out of John's Gospel for quite some time now, and the momentum is building. The excitement is rising as we get closer and closer to the reality of Holy Week. It started with the story of Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Nicodemus, who was one of the religious establishment of you, if you will, who came by night to find out who was this man Jesus. And that the woman at the well, who was shamed by her community, who was an outcast at the well, who Jesus said to her, "If you knew the gift of living water, you would ask, and he would give it to you." And then the story of the blind man, who also lived in shame because of his illness, thought to be a sinful man, either him or his family. And Jesus gives sight to him. And now Jesus goes so far to raise the dead back to life. But I want to go to that story today by starting at the end and then returning to the beginning. Did you notice at the end that Jesus involves the people who have gathered? First, the stone in front of the tomb. He asked them, "Remove the stone." And then, when Lazarus comes out, Jesus doesn't just take the bandages off or the grave wrappings, the burial wrappings, but he says to the people, you unbind him and let him go. Our relationship with God is never just about me and God and nobody else. The relationship with God always begins with that relationship that we share, and that's important. We need to nurture it. We need to care for it. We need to pay attention to it. But that relationship that we share one-on-one is always about reaching out to the community, always embracing the whole. We go back to the story of Abraham, where our salvation story begins, and we are told, Abraham and Sarah said, "You are being blessed to be a blessing." And so it is in the Gospel of John when Jesus says to the people, "You unbind him and let him go." You are being called to be the blessing, to unbind those who are bound up and in chains or in prison, and let them go. In January, the Lutheran magazine told the story about Damascus Road Church, which is in Rockwell City. It's a ministry to people who are in prison. And every year, or I think a couple times a year, they have a program called Brothers in Blue, where they gather together with these people to share with them the reality of the gospel. Now, I know the people involved in that ministry through my work at Wartburg Seminary a few years back. And one of those people was Father John. Father John was just this incredible, humble farmer that just lived his faith out. And he talks about going into the Road to Damascus church, meeting with these people in worship, but also then when they were coming out, helping them to make that transition. And he said there were some successes and some failures, but there was always joy in that ministry. Now, we don't have to be in the literal reality of prison to feel like we're living in prison or we're living in chains. Some of you may have felt that by the debt load that you're carrying. Sabrina shared with us, Sabrina Rogers, one of our new members, led the Financial Peace University. And she invited people to come who have known that reality of debt, who want to get on top of that in their life. And after 9 weeks, that class of 5 families, which hung in there till the end, reduced their debt by $38,000. Now think about that for a moment. That's 5 families, but what an incredible gift that was. And Sabrina shared that she and Brian also were able to finally sell their house after 3 years and get rid of that $101,000 debt. So you put all that together and you see God's working. Some of the people are in debt not because of anything that they did wrong, but maybe because of medical expenses. Or like the reality of Father John, who shared with us that in the early 80s, when there was the farming crisis, that he could barely hang on. He faced the reality of being shut down. And then just a few years later, through nothing different that he did, he was just that trustworthy farmer. In the early, about 3 years ago when I visited with him, he said, I'm now a millionaire because of the price of the land. You see that difference. And I think about, what is it that imprisons us? What is it that is binding us in the midst of our life? For some people, it's a medical diagnosis. It's a medical diagnosis that forces them to face the reality of their mortality. For some, it's a broken relationship that they are struggling with. For others, it might be addiction. For others, it might be the loss of a job. I have shared with you the reality that our little grandson is in residential care because of behavioral issues, mental health related. Well, he got a 4-hour pass yesterday. First 4-hour pass in 7 months. And he came to our house. And I can't tell you the joy of that young man walking into our kitchen and giving him a hug and saying, you did it, Cade, you passed the week. And you got to come and visit. There is incredible joy when those chains have been broken. And we know the reality of new beginnings. Now, he's got a ways to go yet, folks. I mean, he's still in residential care. But it's a step on the possibility of hope. One of the members of this congregation, Pam Humble, many of you know her, I'm sure. She comes usually to the Wednesday night services. But at Christmas time, she makes these incredible Christmas stockings where she takes something old. She goes to the Goodwill store and she finds these coats. And I think on Monday, I think she told me they're like $4, but when you get to Wednesday, they're down to 50 cents. So she waits till Wednesday because she figures if somebody really needs that coat, they should get it first choice. And then she takes those coats and transforms this something old into something new. And she gave me one of those Christmas stockings with the nativity scene on it. And I have that hanging on my wall. And every time I look at that, I think about that possibility of something old being transformed into something new. And when I saw that, I said to Pam, Pam, I said, how would you like to make some of those for the youth at the residential care facility? It was 4 Oaks where my grandson is. Now, mind her, I talked to her about 10 days before Christmas and said, how would you like to give that to him for Christmas? And you know what? She did it. She figured out a way. You know, they take a lot of work, but she started with blue jeans. But I want you to create that, think of that image. What is old that can be transformed into something new? God is calling us to be the people that unbind those who are in chains and give them the hope of the promise of new life. We received word this past week that the second pastoral candidate, who we thought would be an excellent match for this place, has withdrawn their name. Now, what I know about that is that my call in this place is not finished. So get ready, folks, because we are opening another new chapter. What is God calling forth from us? It seems that it continues to grow. I mean, yesterday, the 11 children who were celebrating First Communion, there will be 3 baptisms at the Easter Vigil service. There will be new members, either renewing membership in this congregation or transferring membership into this place, who are going to be a part of this. We have been talking about the shift in mental health ministry, and Ken is working on a task force, and already I believe at least 8 people have stepped forward with a willingness to serve, to say, what is God calling forth? We look at the reality of the hunger, and we thought $500 was an achievable goal for us. We're at $2,000 and growing. I can only imagine what the anonymous donor is saying at this point as he watched the gifts rise and come forth in this place. We need to be concerned about the whole. When we talk about the gift of our faith, I think about, what does it mean to have been born in this country, in the United States? Today on my way out to worship, the song was God Bless America by Gene Autry. Some of us are old enough to remember that Gene Autry. And he's singing God Bless America. And I thought about, God blessed Abraham and Sarah, and so God is blessing us to be a blessing with what God has first given to us. We're in the midst of budgets in our national scene and on our states, on both our statewide and national. And the emphasis is the budget is a moral document. What does our budget say about us? In Iowa, we've kept the minimum wage in place and said that that's the law of the land for Iowa. Now, my friends have told me that we don't need to be alarmed because employers are going far above and beyond the minimum wage because they need the workers and there's an increasing demand for people. But we, my friends, we are the ones that are held with that responsibility of saying, yes, let this budget bring justice and peace for all. I often say, God, what did you have in mind when I was born in this country? And if those of you that were down at the hunger session, and we talked about the people that were born in Africa, and a woman who was missing a leg, a woman whose husband was killed, a woman who had 6 children, but a woman filled with hope, filled with the hope of the gospel. I can only imagine what God has in store for us in this place. Have no doubt about it, it has been a privilege for me to serve with you, and it will be a privilege for me to continue to serve with you. But we're not going to be sitting here doing nothing. I'll guarantee you that as well. And you've demonstrated that. So that, as we think about the gospel lesson for today, when Jesus says, unbind them and let them go, let us be the people that are reaching out to unbind those who are in chains and to let them experience the hope of the gospel. Lazarus' life was not easy after he was raised from the dead. If you were here for the betrayal on Wednesday nights, you know that the Jews started looking for a way to put him to death because he was evidence of the living Christ, and they wanted to get rid of the evidence. You remember the blind man who had the courage to go out, speak to his neighbors, speak to the Pharisees, speak to the Jews, speak to the parents, and tell them about the gospel of Jesus. You look at the woman at the well who had the courage to go to the very people who had shamed her and proclaim the gospel by saying, "Come and see." And you look at Nicodemus, who was a leader in the synagogue, who went to the other Pharisees and spoke up for Jesus and was at the foot of the cross. Unbind them and set them free. It's the gospel. Amen.